South Africa is still on the radar, if you will, for the Trump administration. Just over the weekend, on his social media platform, Donald Trump was basically putting it out there whether he should attend the G20 Leaders Summit in November or not. It'll be interesting to see then if the envoy can be able to smooth over, if you will, the relationship between Washington and Johannesburg. But a reminder that when we do bring up the tweets and other messages, those are the views of those of you watching and not necessarily ones shared by SABC News.
And of course, as we stay with this particular matter, let's take a look at what of course, our reporter Kailihle Khumalo had to say, especially when speaking to Aspen's Dr. Stavros Nicolaou on Jonas's appointment.
I think it's a very good development. I say so because President Trump deals with envoys. If you ever look at how he structures his negotiations, he deals with envoys. So why that is important is, and why this appointment is particularly important for the following reasons. Firstly, the United States is our second biggest trading partner and our second biggest investor in South Africa. So we cannot afford to ignore the relationship. Yes, it is strained, as you correctly say, and I think appointing an envoy is some attempt to narrow the gap, or that strained gap that we are seeing at the moment. The other thing that's important is you've got a political perspective and you've got a trade perspective, and the two are intertwined. So you need someone that is sufficiently skilled both on the political side and on the business side to try and get this intertwining framed correctly so that we do present an attractive proposition to the United States. And Jonas is a very good candidate. He understands politics. He's been in business. He's been the chairman of listed companies. So I think he's an excellent choice from that perspective. And then very lastly, we toyed around as a country with an idea of, do we replace an ambassador or don't we? Do we rather send an envoy first? And if that envoy makes sufficient progress, then you can look at appointing an ambassador. The risk of sending another ambassador now, and not knowing whether that ambassador will be well received or not, was a big risk. And one way of mitigating that risk is let us send an envoy who's skilled, as Jonas is, and can hopefully lay some type of a foundation from which we can narrow the gaps that I spoke about earlier.
Let's get you more on that story. Bring in SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena, who's with us here from our Auckland Park studios. And I suppose it's fair to say there's a lot resting on the shoulders of Mcebisi Jonas as he prepares to go to Washington. And the question will be, what will be the first order of the day once he gets there?
Well, I think as you look at the press release or the statement from the presidency, the main issue here, the envoy will be focusing on reviving the economic relations with South Africa and United States of America. At the time where you have all these announcements, the executive orders signed by President Donald Trump. And at the moment, the main issue now is the issue of the tariffs and AGOA. And therefore, former Deputy Minister Mcebisi Jonas, having been involved in Treasury, in engaging the investors around the world, you'd recall that group from Treasury, including private individuals, they used to visit different countries to sell the country and to invite investors to invest in South Africa. So on the issue of the economic diplomacy, it will be easy for him to handle that. On the political side also, as a former active politician, he would know better in terms of how do you ensure that you put the interest of the country first in line with the foreign policy of South Africa. And therefore, I think those will be the main issues. The first thing to ensure that you are engaging with the US on these trade matters.
And reading the statement that was issued on his behalf, Mcebisi Jonas, by the International Relations Department, Sophie, it's clear that he knows that this is a big task, but he's also aware that he's going to have to tread very carefully. And he even says in that statement that he's appealing to South Africans for patience, perhaps an acknowledgement that it may take time for the relationship to be repaired in any way.
Well, I think he's fully aware in terms of what transpired with Ambassador Rasool. And therefore, he is saying, give me space, give me time, let me see how I handle this one. But I'm ready to handle this and in the interest of the country. But clearly, people will differ in terms of his appointment, and he will have to find a way to navigate this. But what is critical is that you continue the engagement that was started by the DG of the Department of International Relations and the DDG. You know that the DG, Zane Dango, was there. He met senior officials at the White House, and also the DDG was there, Clayson Monyela. So they were able to make inroads in terms of getting people to speak to. Now you have to keep this momentum, and therefore that will be the responsibility of the envoy to do that, come back and report to President Ramaphosa, and then President Ramaphosa will call his ministers, relevant ministers, particularly the Minister of Trade and Industry, Pakstau, and the Minister of International Relations, Minister Ronald Lamula, including the Minister of Agriculture, because you're looking at trade and investment, and agriculture is included, to say, here are the issues with the US. In my view, this is what's happening, and this is how we can move on this. And the president will then decide what to perhaps present on the table as the giveaway, and also what are a no-no in terms of the negotiations. So he will be doing that diplomatic shuttle between Washington and Pretoria, getting these two capitals to talk.
And what do you think is the political and tactical calculation behind sending an envoy, for example, before an ambassador is actually appointed? Because people were waiting for a different announcement, that there'd be an ambassador sent to Washington to take over from Ibrahim Rasool. But we're now getting an envoy, which is a step below in terms of rank, an ambassador.
It's preparations, so that when you appoint the right person. You know very well who that person can be in terms of the skills needed and the approach needed to engage the Americans. Let's take, for an example, you had Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, a serious politician, but also a diplomat who was an ambassador in the United States of America, but at a different time. And therefore, there were problems. Therefore, when you appoint an ambassador this time around, you can't get it wrong, because you want to deal with this issue. And therefore, the envoy will be able to come back and advise you that I think when you appoint the ambassador, you must look at these issues, not names, but how to approach that appointment. That is why even today, Derko was saying the president is going to take his time. But you couldn't leave a vacuum in terms of engagement between the US and South Africa, because we can see there are people who are going to the United States of America presenting disinformation. And if you leave it to those people who are presenting disinformation, you will have challenges. And therefore, you need someone who will be able to engage the White House. And
Sophie, just lastly, how much does Donald Trump care about the issue of South Africa right now, given everything that he's had to deal with, especially the trade war with China that's now taken over the media headlines globally?
Well, let's look at what South Africa has. South Africa has got rare minerals. We know that China is where it is today because of those minerals. And America is trying to do a catch-up. And therefore, countries such as South Africa and the DRC they do have these rare minerals, and therefore you need them if you want to counter China. China has already announced today that it is going to put a halt in sharing the rare minerals, and therefore it will be a scramble for those rare minerals. South Africa has got those rare minerals. When I spoke to the Minister of Health, Aaron Motsoaledi, Dr. Motsoaledi, we were talking about issues of health on the continent, and I asked him about the tariffs. He said they have received a communication from the administration that the tariffs will not apply to the pharmaceutical products. Why? Because the pharmaceutical industry is America, and he knows very well that it is America that is going to suffer. Secondly, the rare minerals. Why? Because he wants South Africa's rare minerals. And therefore, we know even the Minister of Minerals pointed out that one way to negotiate with President Trump is to look at how you say, if you don't help us, we are also not going to help you with the rare minerals. And therefore, I think this time around, this second term, he does need South Africa in relation to those issues that I spoke about. And that is why all the time he talks about South Africa. I mean, right now it's South Africa, China, Canada, Mexico. South Africa, China, Canada, Mexico. So yes, but also the breaking news from Lesotho is that the regulator there has granted Starlink a license to operate in Lesotho. And I think Elon Musk will be very happy. I'm just waiting to see whether he will put that on Twitter.
And once he does, we know we'll come to you, Sophie Mokoena, SABC News International Editor, keeping an eye on every screen possible with everything that's going on in the world at the moment. So the latest then is that South Africa is sending an envoy to Washington. Not today, but we'll know when that happens.